Brian, can you tell us if this is the first time that Ukraine has actually implemented martial law in recent history?
Yes, it is. It's been under consideration a number of times, primarily since the 2014 war began. There were different points in 2014, including immediately when Yanukovych fled the country, that the new government considered imposing martial law. As it's never been imposed in Ukraine before, it's controversial. It's controversial in any country because of the implications. As when you declare an emergency situation like that, you're essentially saying that the country's at war. And so when you acknowledge that the country's at war, then you have to take certain measures. So yes, this is the first time Ukraine has officially declared martial law. It was done with some nuances which make it less dramatic perhaps than most people would have been accompanied to.
Could you give us a brief overview? One, we know that it's only in parts of the country, and two, what are the subtleties of this?
Right, so number one, the areas on the Russian border and the Black Sea, as well as Transnistria, are all included. So that's the first part, 10 oblasts. The second part is, so then that means that the other 15 oblasts are not included. Kyiv, for example, where we are, is not included. The second part, which is of concern, is that when martial law is imposed, then certain civil liberties are limited. For example, it can be everything from mass demonstrations and rallies can be prevented, or it can even be as strict as no alcohol sales. So there's a whole range of things. This also means that state personnel like doctors, for example, can be assigned to military installations. So they may have to leave their hospital and be assigned to a military installation. So there's implications for state workers as well.
But that will be just within these 10 oblasts, correct?
Yes, and there are a number of possibilities. I won't go into them all, but I say all that to say this. In those civil liberty infringements do not take place unless the Russian army invades. So right now, more than anything, this martial law in these 10 regions is more of a state of alert, of heightened alertness for the military and preparations for a possible invasion. It is not, at this point, is not being implemented fully.
So it's more of a mobilization of the armed forces per se, and just getting people in those areas accustomed to possible activities?
That's the best way to describe it. It's a mobilization of the armed forces without an actual call-up. So it's not, they're not calling up everybody they're not instituting a draft. Okay. There are people, there is compulsory military service, but they're not calling up all the soldiers at this point. However, those soldiers that are actively serving are on full alert. They're doing drills. They're preparing as if an invasion would be coming.
Okay, so no call-up of the reserves or the militia?
Not at this time.
Not at this time. What are the provisions for if something, like, what would instigate that?
Well, primarily the Russian army moving forward further into Ukraine than they already have. So that would be, it could be another provocation in the Azov Sea. Yeah. We had wounded Ukrainian soldiers, but if Ukrainian soldiers were killed, that might change the dynamic. Another thing would be is if the lines moved to the Donbass, around Mariel Port particularly, or deeper into Luhansk or Donetsk regions.
How about, I read something, or there's some talk about possible move onto the port itself. That would.
Right, Mariupol is a very strategic, economic and now political port for Ukraine. More than 10% of Ukraine's exports go out of Mariupol port. It used to be higher, actually, but a lot has shifted over to Odessa since 2014. Mm-hmm. So, and if you think about the heavy industries of the Donbass, the coal, the metallurgy, those sorts of things, those traditionally have gone out of the Mariupol port. So with Mariupol potentially closed, or one day it's closed, the next day it's open, that's bad for business. So that can have an economic effect on the local economy, hurt the GDP, hurt jobs, tax collections, everything.
Sure. Well, let's jump into that, because actually you could say in effect that the port is closed because there's a blockade, if I read the information right.
Right. So on Sunday, 2 days ago, it was blockaded. The Russians put a big vessel right in the middle of the strait to essentially block it. So the only way to go around it was to get caught up on a sandbar. So nobody wanted to do that. But de facto, they blocked it with the ship. We all saw the incident, the video of the incident on TV. Since that time, the next day, the Russians, early in the morning, they said, "Oh, we lifted the blockade. Everything's fine. It's open for shipping again." So, but of course, if you're, if you're Peter's, goods and goods and stuff incorporated, you're not going to take a chance of shipping your goods through the straits and under such circumstances. And even if you're a big producer, keep in mind, Rinat Akhmetov, Ukraine's richest man, ships a lot of his stuff out of the Mariel Port. But in his case, he's not going to risk a valuable cargo through the Kerch Straits when it's maybe I get through or maybe I don't get through. When he can put it on a train, he's going to pay more, but he's going to ship it to Odessa, and he's going to ship it out of the Odessa port or Mykolaiv.
Yeah, or would he risk it? Let's even play this game. Would he go in through Russia, into Sochi or wherever? Is that a squeeze on him?
That would not be likely, because already he's a lot of the some of the businesses he already has or has had in the past were nationalized about a year and a half ago. That's one problem. The second problem is some of his businesses are still on the occupied side of the Donbass. So he's already taken a pretty good hit in terms of assets and control of different businesses. So I would think he'd be gun shy to risk anything more, when the easy but more expensive solution is to put it on a train and ship it over to Odessa.
Well, let's bring it back to the current martial law. And so the implementation is in 10 oblasts. What does it mean for other regions? Or what should citizens feel? How is it going to affect them or the military in those regions?
Well, that's the irony. Oftentimes I talk to journalists or people visiting Kyiv, and they are asking about the war, and inevitably they look around and say, "Wow, it looks pretty nice here. This is a great city, beautiful city, and it's really quiet outside." I said, "Well, this is Kyiv. Now, if you go out east, it's a different story." So the reality is, life in Kyiv is pretty much business as usual. Now, I mean, the politicians are talking about it. The military is giving certain orders and making preparations. But de facto, life in Kyiv, Lviv, most of the rest of the country goes on as normal, without any changes, noticeable changes, other than the politicians and the military seem to be busy doing something.
Okay, so that should be pretty much as is for now. Do you think this is going to be prolonged? Like, what's the prognosis for? Is this just 31-time implementation, or is there a provision to extend this?
The best person to ask that would be Vladimir Putin, because he's really the only person who can really factually answer that question. I mean, it all depends on him. If the Russians escalate, if they resume hostilities, then yeah, you could possibly see a prolongation of the martial law in those regions, or it could expand to other regions of Ukraine. At this time, the period is 30 days, which will end just slightly before the 90-day campaign period for the presidential election. So that was one of the key changes in the draft resolution on Sunday that came before the National Security Council and what was actually passed by Parliament last night.
Yeah, let's jump into them. Let's go into those political overtones and the implications for the elections. Let's get into that.
Right. So the draft resolution immediately caught the criticism of President Poroshenko's leading rival for the presidency, former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. She criticized it as a way for Poroshenko to postpone the election, saying that his rating's low, hers is better, she's going to win, he's trying to delay, and so forth. Opposition bloc, the former Party of Regions successor, also jumped in with similar accusations. However, in the final version, Poroshenko leaked to the media and made a statement early yesterday morning that they were going to change from 60 days to 30 days to not interfere with the election. That did not lead to Tymoshenko and the opposition bloc's criticisms to subside, though. They continued to criticize him as a way, use this as a way to postpone the election. The second thing they did, which was unexpected, was they selected just 10 oblasts on the Russian border, on the Black Sea, and on the border with Transnistria to impose the martial law in. So nobody saw that coming. Everyone thought it was going to be nationwide. Also, I would say a wise move by Poroshenko. He included Vinnytsia Oblast, his home region, and Prime Minister Groisman's home region, as one of the oblasts under martial law. Now, the reality is the Transnistrian army hasn't come up in 16 years, and they would have a hard time mobilizing to get to the other side of Chisinau. So, I mean, there's not a real threat from the Transnistrian army, but by including his home oblast into the region, he was saying, we're ready to sacrifice too. We have skin in the game, and we're also, we're right there with you. So we're not asking you to do any other region to do anything that my home region's not doing. So that was a wise political move, even though the real threat from Transnistria is small when compared to the Russian threat in the other regions. So that was an interesting political move. And then after they passed the resolution after they passed the law to declare martial law, rather, they immediately voted to set the presidential election date for March 31. So they essentially took all Timoshenko's arguments that this is a way of postponing the election, and they dispersed them all. One, that it was going to be delayed, didn't happen. Two, that it was going to be nationwide. It only affects the areas on the Russian border and the Black Sea. And then three, the other factor is that Parliament voted to set the date. So now the date's set. Could the date change? Well, possibly, yeah. I mean, if Putin invades or creates another act of aggression somewhere in the Black Sea or Azov Sea, Russian border, obviously that can change things. But then, in that case, if the Russian army is invading, Ukraine has bigger issues to worry about than, presidential political ratings and these sorts of things.
Okay, let's get into now, there are a lot of foreign interests here, a lot of foreigners putting in capital. What should they be thinking, or how should they be planning their futures?
Right, so what was very important right away was the IMF sent out signals that it was the declaration of martial law was not going to stall or delay the new standby agreement. And as you know, in 2014, Yanukovych, he pilfered the country. He ran off with $34 billion or more. Nobody knows exactly how much. And the country's gotten very little of that back. So the country is essentially bankrupt. And so they went in with the IMF, and Natalie Resko orchestrated the largest IMF bailout in the organization's history, over $40 billion. Now, Ukraine's not met all the targets on that, so they're short of that $40 billion plan. However, the IMF is also pretty well invested in Ukraine. So they came back and said, look, we're going to do a one-year standby agreement. We're going to scrap the old agreement. We'll do a one-year standby agreement, get you through the parliamentary and presidential elections. This will keep the economy going and give you economic stability. Then after that, and we see who's president, what the next parliament looks like, then let's talk about a new agreement. So that was a wise move by the IMF, which helped to calm the financial markets. Yesterday during the day, the hryvnia, which had been trading at around 27 to the dollar, US dollar, jumped up to 31 or more on the black market. A lot of the currency exchange booths didn't have dollars or wouldn't sell dollars. Right. So now that's settled down a little bit today. It's down to 29, but you'll continue to have a wider spread between the buy and sell on foreign currency. So those are some of the economic effects. Every market hates war. Unless you're a defense company in a town far from the front. So it has its effects. At the same time, though, we'll see what those effects are on the country's GDP. The martial law declaration itself is not worrisome. What is worrisome is with the Azov Sea closed, what's the effect going to be on all the industries in the east and them having to pay more to ship it out of Odessa or Mykolaiv.
Okay. Yeah, that's...
I'll give you an example. 2016, for example, Selma Pomich and others, they orchestrated a blockade on goods coming out of the occupied regions. And they have a certain moral argument, which made it palatable for people. At the same time, though, that reduced the GDP by a full 1% because of the effects of that blockade. So just as that shaved off the GDP from 3 to 2, we're looking at a 3% GDP growth this year. It's probably too late in the year to affect it too much, but it can definitely affect next year's forecast, which is close to 3%. So that could drop it down to 2 or even half of that.
So now, then, what kind of support can Ukraine expect from the West? Let's say, well, we've gone through the financial, but let's say through politically and militarily, is there what can be expected or what is expected for both?
Right. So the great thing that Ukraine has going for it, which it has not had to this degree in the past, is great international support, particularly among the G7 nations. I mean, Canada has been a really a superhero for Ukraine, starting from the time of when Harper was prime minister, but even now under Trudeau, it's a different government. But both governments have been committed to Ukraine, and so they've been leaders on military assistance, on humanitarian assistance, technical assistance, and so forth. So that's made a big difference. There was obviously concern about the change from Obama to Trump. Trump has turned out to actually have kept all the Obama sanctions plus sold weapons. So that was something that was not foreseen. And then meanwhile, the UK, France, there's Germany. They continue to be supportive of Ukraine, maybe not to the degree of Canada and the US, but the Europeans have largely been in lockstep, particularly within the G7. So there's a great support for sanctions. All these acts by Russia, every once in a while you'll see some MP from this party or that party, he'll make a trip to Russia and he'll say, oh gosh, we should drop the sanctions. These are really nice people. They treated me really nice when I was in Moscow on your 24-hour controlled trip. And he'll go back and he'll say this to the local media. The upside of this is it means that no dropping of the sanctions is going to happen anytime soon. And that's the strongest weapon that we really have against Russia. I mean,
yeah. So let's look at that from that perspective. Why would they do something like that? You think they're trying to provoke the West into? They're talking that they want the sanctions dropped, a big push on that, and now they come up with this. Does it make any sense?
Nobody knows what's in Vladimir Putin's head. I don't think his generals even know. I think, he gets up and decides each day, hey, I got a great idea, let's try this. I know it doesn't make any sense, but let's try it anyway. And you're going to do it because I'm the boss. And so when you have that kind of power and you have unchecked power, sometimes your bad ideas come to the forefront. So for whatever reason, this incident happened on Sunday. It happened. So whether that was ordered or it was the local commanders taking initiative in a bad way, we don't know at this time. Russia has suffered economically, not the billionaires because they got enough to survive, but the average people have suffered. Russia's cut itself off; it's isolated itself, and there's only a certain amount of time that you can keep the juggling act going. For now, they're okay, but some people have suggested one of the reasons and one of the motivations behind this most recent act by Russia of war was that the pension reform in Russia is going poorly. That people are upset, they're not getting the pensions they want, they worked all their lives, a few rubles here and there and so forth, they're unsatisfied. Some people suggested that this is a distraction from that.
So it needs a boogeyman.
Perhaps, that would make sense.
I see, okay. I guess that's pretty much it for now. I really don't, we could probably go on and on, but they kind of covered all the points.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thanks for the interview. And,
yeah.